Okay, so today, let's go over our homework from last week. So last week, we were talking about solving problems, and that's definitely a big idea. So hopefully you tried some things. I know that, if you just, you're on step one, then that's great. I don't want you to feel like you have to be solving problems left and right because we had one conversation about it. Just like our kids, we have to hear things over and over again in order to let them sink in and kind of become routine and natural for us. So our homework last week was to always connect first. Again, I'm a broken record with this, so if you don't take away anything from these 6 weeks other than connecting, and all the ways we talked about doing that in the first couple weeks of classes, then that will be enough for me. As long as you, are feeling like you're connecting more, you're automatically going to get more of everything from your child. More compliance, more happiness, less pushback, less, power struggle. So all of those ways that you can connect is just imperative. So thinking about how you and your child or children have been solving problems, so kind of just checking in with that and deciding, what is it that we have been doing? Or maybe I haven't really thought about it. Or maybe, the ways in which my child problem solves are problematic to me. For example, are they hitting or just ignoring the problem, or are they having tantrums? Just kind of checking in with what is it that's happening currently and what could change. So what do you want it to look like? I think that's really, really the first step. So before you're able to kind of make any steps in the direction of improvement, you have to kind of know what you want. So when you kind of start that journey, just reminding yourself that you have to calm down first. That's not only your child. We talked a little bit about temper tantrums and we watched a video. And I think that's not only your child that needs to be calm, but you as well. So whether that means, some self-care for you, or just checking in with yourself and taking some breaths, deciding on what's your calming ritual, maybe using your child's calming ritual. Whatever it takes for you to kind of be in a more centered place. Starting with your own ideas or a chart. Again, this is if your child doesn't have, the most language, maybe if they're under 3 or right around the age of 3, and they can't really express to you some ways to solve problems, you can definitely give them ideas. Or start with visuals, whether that's pictures of them or Google Images, videos. There's tons and tons and tons. As you know, of stuff on YouTube, even in just Disney movies or other things you might be watching on TV where people solve problems, and having a conversation about that with your child. So it doesn't have to always come from them, but I really encourage you, if they're able to express it to you, if they're 4 and 5 or older, then, a great thing is to just ask them what are their ideas for solving this problem. Showing them. So once you decide how are we going to solve this problem, teaching that to them. So if that is, we're going to do timeouts, choosing a timeout area, choosing a timeout chair, practicing sitting in the chair, practicing, how long you want them to sit in the chair, what do you want them to do while they're there. I think if you're talking about cooperating or sharing toys, does that involve a timer, if you have siblings at home? Does that involve, transition warnings? So once I tell you have 5 minutes left, then you have to give to brother, or whatever it is. Just making sure you show them and practice those things. Again, encouraging their ideas if they're able to give them to you, even if the idea is crazy or, something you're not going to do. So we talked about that last week. So even if it's totally not an option, you're just going to acknowledge it and act like it is. For like 2 minutes, just hang with them and be like, okay, all right, that's a good one, write it down. That's never going to be what happens, but that simple act of acknowledging them goes a long way. You're going to get out of a lot of power struggles because you're giving them some power as opposed to saying no to whatever answer they might have. Acknowledging when those things go well, so when you are practicing the problem solving, making sure you notice when they're doing it. keeping an eye out for when things do arise at home, and acknowledging when they're able to solve it positively. And then if that's not happening, which again it takes some time, this is going to take, we're talking like several weeks of consistent work. This isn't like 1 day or 2 days, randomly. It has to be like a consistent change that you've committed to. And when they, when those mistakes happen, which they will, just kind of say, we're just going to try again tomorrow, or re-show them what it is that you want. And then it says next week is our last week, which is this week. So sad. So today we're going to talk about friendship skills, and kind of all the lessons that we've talked about working up to this really contribute to these things. I mean, all the things that we've talked about are really interrelated. As you know, I'm constantly talking about connection, whether we're communicating or cooperating or making friends. Like those are all things that are important to do with your kids, regardless of what it is that you're specifically working on. So I posted a couple of articles in the community. I don't know if you had a chance to look at them. They're really great. They're a little bit longer, so I kind of didn't want to go through them here, but if you have a chance to click on them and read through, I think that they give a lot of great examples, and they give just some more specifics that I'm not really able to go into in kind of a shorter period of time. So check those out. So friendship skills develop and change over time, but being confident in one's ability to make friends and to be liked kind of lays the foundation for later social interaction. So, I mean, as adults, like we know that friendship skills are definitely, sometimes hard to come by. There's, sometimes it's hard to meet people who are really socially savvy and really good at connecting with people. And that those are the kinds of skills that we would all like our kids to have, because, it gets them really far in life. It gets them through job interviews. It makes them, connected with others and have, kind of fulfilling relationships. So it's definitely something that's really important. So at this age, it can be important that your child, so these are kind of the building blocks that they're going to be working on, feeling confident that he or she can be liked. So that really starts with a lot of the stuff we talked about in our self-confidence week, and how we talk about a lot of connection. So when your child feels like they're connected to you, number one, whomever their main caregiver is, they feel well liked by you, meaning you have a lot of positive interactions. You're not constantly directing them or reprimanding them, but you have those positive interactions that we talked about, like noticing when they're doing the right thing. Having those moments of play with them where you're just enjoying them. Those things make them feel like they can be liked, that they are liked because they're liked by you, and that, you're kind of highlighting that for them, that you're a special person, you're someone that has qualities that people will like. So I think sometimes when there's some difficult things going on at home, a lot of stressful home life, where maybe a child isn't really getting a lot of those messages, like you're someone who can be liked, you're a special person, they tend to maybe not have those great friendship-making skills because they don't feel like, there's anything about them that's worth sharing. So that's kind of first and foremost, and that really comes from, again, you're connecting with them on a consistent and positive basis. So knowing how to enter play groups or initiate play. So at this point, 0 to 5, our kids, that's really what their friendship making, quote unquote, is about. That's obviously different for adults, but for them at this age, it's really entering play groups, and then finally, playing fairly and positively. So following rules, taking turns, regulating themselves, not getting overly emotional. So those are the things that are kind of showing up as part of friendship skills at this age. So again, thinking about what we've learned over the last 6 weeks and how these kind of contribute to friendship skills. The self-confidence piece I just talked about a minute ago. Your child, is able to initiate play and make suggestions for a game. So that takes some confidence. It takes some confidence to approach another child or a group of children, let's say at preschool or at the park or wherever they are, again, to feel like I can be liked. I have this idea of myself as a positive perception of myself, enough so that I think other people would want to play with me, as opposed to a kid who maybe just doesn't believe that because they don't really have a lot of those messages happening. Communication, so can he or she communicate clearly what they want? So this has a lot to do with, just simply developmental age. So as you know, if you have young kids right now, or when you're thinking back to when your child was 2 or 2.5 or younger, they don't have a lot of friendship skills, partially because they just don't have a lot of communication. And they're at that stage, which is very normal, they're very self-absorbed. That's very normal. That means it's hard for them to share toys. It's hard for them to understand the concept of this is not mine. It's simply developmentally they're not there. So once they start to communicate more, kind of 3 and up, they tend to have better friendship skills and just better able to express their social skills. So cooperation. So can he or she share and take turns? That's kind of another question to ask yourself. Is that if you notice, that it's maybe harder for your child to make friends, or you've heard from a teacher that maybe it's hard for them to make friends, just kind of thinking, is that a skill that maybe is difficult for them, sharing and taking turns? And we talked about in our cooperation lesson different ways to kind of promote that. Setting limits. So can he or she follow rules and transition from one activity to the next? This has a lot to do with self-regulation. So are they able to kind of transition without melting down? Are they able to remain calm for a majority of the time, a majority of the day, and the rules don't really ruffle them too much? Because those things can kind of, if you're in a group, a classroom of 20 kids, and you have a child who has a lot of difficulty transitioning, let's say from group time to outdoor play, or, maybe indoor play, they're really involved in something and it's time to go outside and they have a tantrum, and it's kind of a consistent thing, then a lot of the other kids in the class kind of don't know how to handle that. And it may become a challenge in terms of making friends. So it's important, that they're able to follow those limits and kind of transition without those overwhelming negative feelings. And then finally, last week we talked about problem solving. So again, this idea of can he or she calm down and regulate enough to solve problems. So obviously with friends, even as adults, problem solving always comes up. It's not always going to be the perfect relationship. When you're 4 years old, it's about sharing toys. When we're adults, it's about working together, thinking about your coworkers and thinking about those people that are difficult to work with. And, what do you do in those instances? What's your kind of strategy for maintaining those connections or building friendship skills, in your own interactions? And kind of think of it on that level. So in the paperwork for this week, we have checkup A. And this really has to do with kind of checking in again about where is your child right now. So children really differ a lot in terms of the number of friends that they have, and maybe how easy it is for them to make friends wherever they go. So just kind of checking in. So for my child, kind of goes over a scale. Making friends is all the way from easy to really difficult. So what do you notice, about your child, whether that's in family situations or at school? Maybe you've heard again from a teacher, or at the park, or play dates, or whenever you're able to see your child interacting with peers. So around peers, my child is, kind of mark on this scale. This is also a good conversation to have with your partner or with someone else who's, in your child's life consistently. So what do they notice? Is my child outgoing or shy? And then finally, my child cooperates well with peers, or, all the way on the other end has difficulty cooperating with peers. So thinking about that for you and your kids. My child loses his or her temper with peers, never or often. When playing games, my child follows the rules most of the time or hardly ever. And again, we had some of those activity cards that kind of went over that. So kind of playing games and learning how to follow more rules. And my child has difficulty entering a group or new activity. So never to most of the time. And then checkup B. So a little bit later in the discussion, we'll kind of go back to this. I hope to get back to this and kind of talk with you. I want to get through everything first, but then check back with you about this one. So I'd like to kind of know, where you are in terms of knowing your child's interactions with peers. So how do you know these things? Do you play games with your child and their friends? Do you spend time talking with your child about their friends? Do you plan activities? People come over, or do you go to planned activities? Do you provide transportation to activities and maybe talk along the way? Have you observed your child in social situations at school? So most preschools offer an open door policy. So again, that's kind of dependent on your work schedule and what you're able to do, but I'm pretty sure, if your child's attending preschool, that you're able to go and observe the class and kind of see, granted, you being there kind of changes dynamics, but sometimes there's ways to kind of watch without them seeing you, just kind of checking in to see, how is it that they're interacting with peers. So the goal, playing with your child regularly to develop play and cooperation skills. So this is it's kind of important to know how it is that your child interacts when it comes to peers, and whether that's, again, carving out some time to observe them. I think that's really important. So sometimes we assume things. You may assume that maybe the way your child behaves at home or behaves with siblings is the same or similar to how they behave with, peers at school, and it could potentially be very different, and because that's not their family, or, they may feel different kinds of pressure or just feel differently when they're in a school environment versus at home. So I think it's really key to know how it is that your child plays and to intentionally make that time to observe them. So if the only opportunity you have is watching them with their siblings or with cousins or family, then take it. Take the opportunity instead of going to the play date or going to the family party and just being like, oh, great, my kid's occupied. I'm just going to drop them off with the other kids and kind of go over here and do adult things, which obviously, you should do too, but just taking like 10, 15 minutes to kind of let your kid go with, their peers and just watch them and see, do they cooperate? Can they follow rules? Are they showing empathy for other kids in the group? So just kind of answering those own questions about yourself and just figuring out, what it is that they're doing. I think sometimes we don't take that opportunity intentionally. So, when our kids are young, we have opportunities to help them with peer relationships. Obviously, it gets harder as they get older and they're more independent, and they kind of are doing their own thing, and they're really learning those building blocks now with you. And if you're able to show them and teach them in the moment how to maybe make a better choice with a friend, it could help them potentially long term. So we're going to talk about activity and parent tip cards in a minute. So right at the top there, it just says accepting your child's feelings about other children helps your child continue to express feelings and thoughts. So we've talked about this a lot. We've talked about this in solving problems. We talked about this in setting limits. And really, acknowledging feelings is so important. It allows your child to feel heard, allows them to feel more connected. The more connected they feel to you, the more likely they are to connect with other people. I know maybe it sounds counterintuitive, but that's where they're learning. Most of their social emotional skills is their interactions with you, and then they're kind of flipping that and interacting with peers and with others, because that's what they've learned. So, the more connected they feel to you, the more likely they're going to try to, positively connect with other people. So regularly practicing games and playing games kind of helps your child to learn how to play them, to take turns. And it says don't accept behavior that friends wouldn't. I think that's really important. So I think, as the adult, sometimes we think, oh, well, my kid's 4 years old, I'm playing a game, and okay, so they're cheating, whatever, they're 4. But I think, sometimes, and maybe that's okay sometimes, but I think that you should make a point to be intentional about, really making sure that they are following the rules and that they are taking turns when they should be, because they're, again, going to kind of transpose those interactions when they're with peers. And if they're always able to cheat at home, which may be fun and fine, it's not okay with friends. So role-playing the ideas for solving problems. We've talked about that, again, with our other lessons, just a lot of showing instead of talking. And again, real quickly going back to this accepting feelings. So I think sometimes, if our child has let's say they're at the park and something happens between a peer, like they take the toy and your child gets really upset about it. And let's say you were watching the incident and you noticed that maybe your child instigated it or something. Instead of, I think, reacting like, oh, well, you pushed him over first, or, oh, well, you pushed sand on him, so he took your toy, like, whatever. I think it's still, and again, that's not to say that if your child, for example, did push the other child first, that you don't have a conversation about that, or you don't model and role play behavior, where you explain to them that pushing is not okay. But in that moment, accepting that they're upset, I think, is really important. So accepting that they're upset that their toy was taken away, kind of letting go of trying to control the situation around that, of like, oh yeah, but you deserved it, because you did X, Y, Z. So I think really, again, by them allowing them to feel heard, and it helps them to understand other people's emotions too, when you acknowledge what their emotion is. So, oh, you're really upset that he took your toy, and then having a conversation about how maybe to share better. So that acknowledgement of feelings piece is really key. So secrets of success: talking to your child each day about playtime, school, experiences with peers. Again, not worrying about having the right answers. Asking questions like, how did her face look when he took her cookie, or what did he do when we found out his favorite truck had been lost? Again, these are things you can do just real quickly. I don't want you to think about, I don't want you to think, oh gosh, I have like all of these things in my day, which you do, but when your child is watching a cartoon, or again, like a movie, or you're reading a story, there's tons and tons of situations that pop up that involve emotions. Pausing the movie and asking them about it. Oh, she's crying. How does she feel? What happened? Why does she feel that way? Engaging in these conversations can really help them to understand the feelings of others, and that's really the goal here when we're trying to connect with other people. So our do's and don'ts box, do allow your child to express feelings, again, even if you don't agree with them, even if you know what happened right beforehand, even if, take that minute, that 30 seconds of time, and acknowledge their feeling for what it is, regardless of what you think about it. Well, they shouldn't be sad. Well, it's not a big deal. We're not 3 years old. So when a toy gets taken away from a 3-year-old, it is a big deal. It's a really big deal. It's like something big happening in our lives. We just kind of have to accept that and let it go and acknowledge that they're upset about it. Offer other children's perspectives. So again, if that's acknowledging, what does the other person feeling, or just more often talking about feelings in your household, because that helps them to learn about how others are feeling. Turning problems into positive goals. Again, that's kind of talking about whether you're making a better choice and showing them how to do that. Not criticizing or correcting feelings. So again, we talked about that. So not saying, well, you shouldn't be sad, or you took the toy first, or, that's very invalidating. Not lecturing or using too many words. Again, showing is far more effective than talking. And not failing to listen carefully. So we talked about that in other lessons of, really listening and responding to what your child is saying. And that can take some time and makes, force us ourselves to be a little bit more intentional about that. So things to keep in mind in terms of friendship skills. So providing opportunities for play. If your child's an only child, if they're around adults a lot, if they're around only like a particularly older sibling, where that they don't have a lot of peer interaction, let's say they're not in preschool yet, providing those opportunities, because they can only learn better social skills by practicing them. So if they're really not getting those, it can be a challenge. Observing your child during play, we talked about that. Don't assume taking that time to observe them. Teaching positive social skills, so in the moment if you're able to. If you're at the park and there's some issue that happens with a toy, taking that moment, or again, that's not always opportune, so if for some reason it's not going to work right then because the other child's parent is there and it's awkward, obviously you do what you need to do. But if at all possible, as much as possible, making it as close to the incident as possible so that your child is able to link the discussion to the behavior. If you're waiting an hour to talk about it, it's probably going to be less likely that they'll get it. So stopping in that moment and asking, like, what would be a better choice? Modeling a better choice. Talking about what are the problem-solving options you had here instead of taking a toy or whatever. And yourself remaining calm. And then following up, whether or not you take that time in that moment right then, if you're able to or not, I would say even if you're able to do that in the moment, follow up later. So when your child's calm, when they're away from the situation, talk about it again. So saying, let's talk about when sharing toys. How can we do that? Or what are some of the rules about that? Or role-playing with stuffed animals about sharing toys, talking with older siblings about what that means. So if you know that that's something that's popped up for you and for your child and something they need to work on, just coming back to it later. So I have a quick video example. This one is about social skills. So there's actually a fair amount of social skills videos that are available on YouTube. A lot of them are made for children who are on the autism spectrum because they struggle with a lot of social skills. But I think that they're so applicable to young kids and just to kids in general, honestly, people in general. I mean, we know adults who have terrible social skills, so they're really applicable to anyone. So I don't want you to feel, any kind of way about it because it might be a video for someone who, has autism or is on the spectrum. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your child if they need to work on social skills. And I think these videos really break it down very nicely and break it down into simple language and show examples of the right way, and kind of a more difficult way when it comes to social interaction. So this one talks about taking turns speaking and listening.
To have a conversation, not only do you have to get someone's attention, but you also have to take turns speaking and listening. Let's see what happens in a conversation between Sam and Jonathan.
Hey Jonathan, I got a puppy yesterday. His name is Max. He's a standard poodle and he's really cute.
Oh, I have a dog too. His name's Cecil, and we take him for walks and stuff.
Yeah,
Oh, and Cecil? Yeah, he goes up to my bed to go to sleep.
Yeah, and he
Oh, my dog's really cool because we take him for walks and we run with him.
Let's see what everyone's thinking.
keeps interrupting me. He won't let me tell him about my dog.
I want to tell Sam all about my dog.
He doesn't give me a chance to talk.
People will only want to talk to you if you stop and listen to what they have to say too. If you don't, the friend will probably get frustrated and walk away. Let's see what Jonathan could have done differently to get a better outcome.
Hey Jonathan, I got a dog yesterday. His name's Max, and he's a standard poodle, and he's really cute.
Oh, I have a dog too. His name is Cecil.
Yeah, that's cool. My dog, he can do tricks. I take him outside and I play with him.
I really want to tell Sam about my dog, but he really wants to tell me about his dog. We should probably take turns. Yeah, I taught him up and lay down.
I taught him sit and lay down, and I taught him how to roll over and fetch.
Oh, you taught him a lot. Maybe our dogs should meet up sometime.
Oh, that's cool.
You need to take turns speaking and listening while having a conversation. If you cut friends off and don't let them join the conversation, you are not having a conversation. You are lecturing them. People will only want to talk to you if you stop and listen to what they have to say too. Classmates like to be friends with children who take turns speaking while having a conversation.
Okay, so even if you think, oh, that video was so basic, we're talking about sharing a conversation and actually listening to what someone's saying. First of all, I would challenge you to think of someone, an adult that you know, who does that, who doesn't listen very well and kind of takes over the conversation, or if you've ever been in a class and another student kind of takes over the conversation and asks all these lengthy questions to the teacher, and, is kind of maybe unaware of how this affects other people, either the other person in the conversation or the class or whatever it is, I would say there's a lot of people who kind of need to know and recognize those skills. So I just really like how they kind of break it down into simpler language, and it's a great way to show a quick video of the right way versus the wrong way. So just real quickly, talking about that, these stages that we went over last week, and just thinking about this in terms of, friendship skills. And it really is a developmental stages here, whether or not, your child's in the place where they can start working on those social skills. So wherever they are on this continuum, thinking, where is it that you need to start? So are they on step 1, which is totally fine. That's totally fine. If you recognize they're really still on step 1, I know my child needs to be a little bit more regulated, which means, they need to feel a little bit more calm and centered most of the time. Little tiny things set them off. So if that's where they are, where they need just a little bit more regulation, then that's where to start. Okay, so I need to work on this before I'm really working on those friendship skills, because they need to know, I need to know that they're able to calm themselves first, and then, kind of branching out to other people. Are they able to be engaged and relate? So are they, again, that comes after regulation. So if you're not regulated, if you're, again, bothered by very little things or tantruming by having to transition, then you're probably not going to be engaged. You're just not there yet. And then you're moving on to, are they able to have, communication that makes sense? And if they're not there, then that's what you're working on. Are they able to solve problems logically? And are they able to think of different ways to solve problems? I would say that right around that number 4 is really where, between like 4 and 5, is really where they're able to kind of capitalize on these friendship-making skills, because they're able to solve problems, they're able to be calm, they're able to communicate. If they're anywhere else on the scale, I would say that's really where to start, instead of jumping right into, talking more to peers, for example. So going over briefly just some of the activity cards for this week, which are posted there for you in the community, and I think emailed to you as well. So just reflecting whatever problem it is that your child is bringing to you. So this allows them to feel heard and allows you not to interpret and assume what they're saying. So it says, do this. It seems like it was really hard for you to figure out how to draw that picture, instead of, you must have felt really bad when you couldn't do that. Let me show you how. So this is really, I don't want to say not the way to go about things, because there's really no wrong answer, but this is going to be, going to just provide a little bit more challenges. If you're taking over what your child needs to do, instead of acknowledging that it was difficult for them and having them try again. Accepting those feelings. Again, whether you like them or not, please write that in big red letters. Whether I like it or not, accepting it. So it doesn't matter if you don't think they should be upset. It doesn't matter if you don't want them to be mad right now because you're tired. Just taking that minute to say, you sound like you're really mad. You look really upset. You look really sad that your sister took your toy. In parentheses, even though you hit her first. You can say that in your head. Go for it. Just don't say it out loud. Just acknowledge the feeling. Instead of, it's not right to say you hate someone. Now again, this doesn't mean that you can't go back and talk about how you don't like the word hate, or you don't want them to use that word, but I'm just saying in that moment, by choosing to acknowledge the feeling versus telling them what they're doing wrong, you've gained a lot of leverage, in that moment, by allowing them to have that feeling. So playing with your child and their friends helps you to get to know your child better, to get to know their play skills better. If you're able to have the time to do this, I think it's great. This tip card talks about the adult and child play interactions video. That's part of another curriculum, so I don't want you to think you're missing something. There are, however, if you YouTube or Google play interactions or children playing videos, you'll find a ton of stuff. So feel free to do that if you think it would be helpful. Sitting and watching your child play for a few minutes. So we talked about that already. And then asking them questions about what they're doing. You can only fill their bucket and make them feel like, they're really special to you. When you play with your child, play what they like. Get on the floor, dig in the dirt. I don't know so much about digging in the dirt, but get on the floor inside, play pretend games. Be silly. I'm sure you've experienced this. They love it when you are silly with them, when you just kind of get on their level and play. It makes them feel very connected to you, like mom or dad, really gets me. So that's like a really powerful message you're sending them. Children are usually more comfortable playing than talking. So as adults, we talk all day long, when we tell them things all day long, but how often do we show them? How often do we play through it with them? Showing them through play is going to be a lot more effective. And so it also allows you to see how they kind of maybe play with peers. I think playing with you is a little different than with their peers, but you can learn things like if they get frustrated easily or if they're able to take turns. Those things I think you can really learn. Just reiterating, children learn much more by doing than talking. Help your child try out ideas for improving peer skills by rehearsing them, role-playing. Kind of allows them to try on different answers. Whenever you or your child share, point it out. For example, say to your child, I saw you give the red crayon to Jose. That's great sharing. You can even point out things that you do. So saying like, oh, look, mommy's sharing her coffee with, sister, or mommy's sharing her, her food with daddy, or whatever. Just pointing out instances of sharing that you see happening to kind of get them to know the concept. Tell your child what it feels like when you share, when others share. So talking about the feelings surrounding those things. Complimenting or acknowledging all those sharing attempts your child makes. Having a conversation, again, I would encourage this only if your child has a lot of language, like late 4, 5-year-old. So asking them, how do you let them know you want to play? I think younger kids, like 3 and under, you're not going to get much from asking them. You really have to watch them and see what they do. They're probably not going to be able to articulate it. But there may be some rules in the classroom that they could tell you about. The teacher might have some rules about how to initiate play. I think sometimes when I'll be in classrooms, and teachers will talk about maybe children who are hitting or, taking toys from other friends. I don't want to say a lot of times, but sometimes in my observations, I honestly think that's because they don't know how to initiate play. And that's being interpreted by the teacher as aggressive behavior. But really, it's because the child doesn't know. They may think, oh, if I grab his toy, then I'm engaging with him. He's engaging with me. Once I grab it, I get a reaction. And so by simply bridging that gap and kind of teaching that skill of how to ask for play appropriately, you can cut down on aggressive behaviors. So watching what's being played. Start playing something similar near the other children and slowly join in. Again, these are suggestions you can make if your child is at that level of language and understanding. I think these are just some examples of talking about, they kind of name these hypothetical kids, Bossy Beth. Beth likes to be in charge of games she plays with her friends. She likes to decide what to play and who should do what. How do you think her playmates feel? Draw a picture. Let's talk about it. I think just giving examples of different ways that kids interact socially can be helpful. And you can do that, again, through TV or stories, or kind of watching your child play with peers. Choosing a game, again, just the more play and games you get involved with your children, the more you're able to know what their social skills and friendship skills are like. This is just a really, really wonderful way to bring literacy kind of to life for kids who are just becoming literate or don't really read yet. So it's called Storytelling for the Home Enrichment of Language and Literacy Skills. That's kind of a mouthful. That's why they call it SHELLS. So the person who started this, her name is Lisa Boyce. She's in Utah, and she actually consults with our program. So she was using it with migrant families because they were, English was their second language, and so it was kind of a way for them to really kind of transition a little bit better into school and just connect better at home, and she just had wonderful results. So we then brought it to preschool families that we were working with in our previous project, and we're doing it again. So if you're on Oahu, which I know you guys are on Maui, but if you're randomly on Oahu the weekend of the 29th of October, it's a Saturday, they're going to be doing a session. So basically, you're enjoying a fun activity with your children, and then you're documenting it with photos. We have Polaroid cameras, so you're taking pictures of, let's say, you're making a calming jar. I don't know if you've ever seen those, but they're like these jars with glitter in them and like glue, and it kind of you shake it up almost like a snow globe, but the glitter moves around really slowly, so it's kind of a way to have your child watch this glitter and calm themselves down. Sometimes we've made those in past sessions, and so you have all the materials there, you're putting them together, and then you're taking pictures of each of the steps and you're putting them in this booklet. So you're writing it, and then your child will help you write a story about the experience, and then they can go home and quote unquote read the book, even though they can't read, but they're able to tell you the story because they've experienced it. So it's just a really cool activity. I really, again, encourage you to at least like read a little bit more about it and hopefully be able to kind of engage with it at some point on Maui. Promote self-confidence in children, better connection, and it's just a great bonding experience for you and your child. You're able to kind of do something fun together. Sometimes, we don't always have time or money to kind of do these fun activities, and so it's just a way for you, an opportunity for you to do that. It provides early literacy and supports the early literacy in the home, and allows your child to read to you, and just connects books and reading to real life experiences. So it only makes the idea of reading more fun. And we know from research, of course, that that's so important, that kids want to read and, feel that reading is something fun for them.